honor to Dr. King. Today we gather in the White House to honor the memory of a great American hero, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. On January 15th, 1929, Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He would go on to change the course of human history. As a young man, Dr. King decided to follow the calling of his father and grandfather to become a Christian pastor. He would later write that it was quite easy for me to think of a God of love, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central. That is what Reverend King preached all of his life: love. Love for each other, for neighbors, and for our fellow Americans. Dr. King's faith and his love for humanity led him and so many other heroes to courageously stand up for civil rights of African Americans. Through his bravery and sacrifice, Dr. King opened the eyes and lifted the conscience of our nation. He stirred the hearts of our people to recognize the dignity written in every human soul. Today we celebrate Dr. King for standing up for the self-evident truth Americans hold so dear, that no matter what the color of our skin or the place of our birth, we are all created equal by God. This April, we will mark a half century since Reverend King was so cruelly taken from us by an assassin's bullet. But while Dr. King is no longer with us, his words and his vision only grow stronger through time. Today we mourn his loss, we celebrate his legacy, and we pledge to fight for his dream of equality, freedom, justice, and peace. I will now sign the proclamation making January 15th, 2018, the Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday, and encourage all Americans to observe this day with acts of civic work and community service in honor of Dr. King's extraordinary life, and it was extraordinary indeed, and his great legacy. Thank you. God bless you all, and God bless America. And with that, I'd like to ask a great friend of mine, Secretary Carson, for remarks. Then we're going to be signing the very important proclamation. Thank you very much. Ben?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here today, celebrating this solemn occasion. And I thank you for signing legislation to designate the birthplace, church, and tomb of Dr. Martin Luther King as a National Historic Park. His monumental struggle for civil rights earned these places in his life, faith, and death the same honor as Mount Vernon and that famous humble log cabin in Illinois. This April, we will observe the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I remember so vividly that day as a high school student in Detroit. Far from silencing his dream, death wrought him immortal in the American heart. His message of equality, justice, and the common dignity of man resounds today, urgently needed to heal the divisions of our age. Today we honor the legacy of the man who marched on Washington for jobs and freedom, achieving both for millions of Americans of all races and backgrounds. But his legacy also calls us to remember where these ideas, equality, freedom, liberty, get their power. Our good efforts alone are not enough to lend them meaning. For by what shall I be called equal to another man? It cannot be by wealth, for there will always be one richer than me. It cannot be by strength, for there will always be one stronger than me. It cannot be by success or happiness or beauty or any other pieces of the human condition which are distributed through providence. So perhaps providence alone is the answer. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With these familiar words, our Declaration of Independence recognizes the true author of our common dignity, one that is beyond every human law and institution. If we forget this source of our fundamental equality, then our fight to recognize it in our society will never be fulfilled. This is a truth that Dr. King carried with him from Selma to Montgomery, from a pulpit in Atlanta to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, from a cell in Birmingham to the entire world. This year, we will not remember his slaying as the ending, but as a beginning, as a moment when his truth rose stronger than hatred and his cause larger than death, as a moment when he called to new life with his Creator, before whom all men shall one day stand in equal rank, bearing with them no riches but the content of their character. If we keep this conviction at the center of our every word and action, if we look upon our countrymen as brothers with a shared home and a common destination, then instead of meaningless words rolling off of our tongue, we will truly create one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we're going to have a word from Pastor Isaac Newton Ferris, the nephew of Dr. Martin Luther King.
President Trump, Vice President Pence, and to all assembled here. If my uncle were here today, the first thing he would say is, what are we or what are you doing for others? And that's why it was so important that my aunt Coretta Scott King returned to the Congress now about 10 years ago and asked that the meaning of the holiday be changed. We did not want the King holiday just to be a day of hero worship. As his nephew, I certainly think that he was one of the greatest Americans that we've produced. But it should not be a day of hero worship. And that's why the Congress agreed with my aunt and also made it a day of service. So that we, on that day, as a matter of fact, at the King Center, we refer to it as a day on, not a day off. It's not a day to hang out in the park or pull out the barbecue grill. Amen. It's a day to do something to help someone else. And that can be as simple as delivering someone's trash or picking up the newspaper for that elderly person who can't get to the end of the driveway. Bottom line, you're doing something that benefits someone other than yourself. That's the proper way to remember my uncle and the proper way to celebrate the King holiday. So, President Trump, thank you for taking the time to acknowledge this day. Thank you for remembering that we're all Americans, and on this day we should be united in love for all Americans. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
This is a great and important day, Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday. 2018 by the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. Congratulations to him and to everybody. Thank you, Mr. President.
I want to thank Secretary Carson, along with Isaac Newton Ferris Jr., and the many distinguished guests for joining us here today. It's a great honor. Earlier this week, I had the tremendous privilege to join Isaac and Alveda to sign into law legislation redesignating the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site to the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park. The new law expands the area protected, and historic sites for the future generations of Americans are becoming so important. And this is a great honor for us and a great honor to Dr. King. Today we gather in the White House to honor the memory of a great American hero, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On January 15th, 1929, Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He would go on to change the course of human history. As a young man, Dr. King decided to follow the calling of his father and grandfather to become a Christian pastor. He would later write that it was quite easy for me to think of a God of love, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central. That is what Reverend King preached all of his life: love. Love for each other, for neighbors, and for our fellow Americans. Dr. King's faith and his love for humanity led him and so many other heroes to courageously stand up for civil rights of African Americans. Through his bravery and sacrifice, Dr. King opened the eyes and lifted the conscience of our nation. He stirred the hearts of our people to recognize the dignity written in every human soul. Today we celebrate Dr. King for standing up for the self-evident truth Americans hold so dear, that no matter what the color of our skin or the place of our birth, we are all created equal by God. This April, we will mark a half century since Reverend King was so cruelly taken from us by an assassin's bullet. But while Dr. King is no longer with us, his words and his vision only grow stronger through time. Today we mourn his loss, we celebrate his legacy, and we pledge to fight for his dream of equality, freedom, justice, and peace. I will now sign the proclamation making January 15th, 2018, the Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday, and encourage all Americans to observe this day with acts of civic work and community service in honor of Dr. King's extraordinary life, and it was extraordinary indeed, and his great legacy. Thank you. God bless you all, and God bless America. And with that, I'd like to ask a great friend of mine, Secretary Carson, for remarks. Then we're going to be signing the very important proclamation. Thank you very much. Ben?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here today, celebrating this solemn occasion. And I thank you for signing legislation to designate the birthplace, church, and tomb of Dr. Martin Luther King as a National Historic Park. His monumental struggle for civil rights earned these places in his life, faith, and death the same honor as Mount Vernon and that famous humble log cabin in Illinois. This April, we will observe the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I remember so vividly that day as a high school student in Detroit. Far from silencing his dream, death wrought him immortal in the American heart. His message of equality, justice, and the common dignity of man resounds today, urgently needed to heal the divisions of our age. Today we honor the legacy of the man who marched on Washington for jobs and freedom, achieving both for millions of Americans.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start today's briefing by bringing up Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The IRS is releasing new withholding tables, which is great news for American workers who are going to be keeping more of their hard-earned money as a result of the new tax cut law. And the Secretary will get into those details on that and then answer a few of your questions on that topic. Then, as always, I'll be back up here to take questions on other news of the day. That, Mr. Secretary?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me first just comment and say I am pleased that I will be leading the economic delegation for the President in Davos. We'll have a very good, large group of cabinet members traveling with us, and Sarah will give more information on that later. I'd like to talk about the withholding tables. So today, the Treasury Department and IRS released new withholding guidance that will implement the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. This new guidance will mean that workers and their families will receive larger paychecks starting in February. This has been a massive project that we've been working on, beginning to implement the tax plan. There's a lot of work left to be done, but we're estimating that 90% of the workers are going to see an increase in take-home pay because of the Tax Cuts Act. This historic legislation doubles the standard deduction, simplifies the filing process, lowers the rate for millions of middle-income Americans and their families. I want to acknowledge the Treasury's Office of Tax Policy and the IRS, who worked round the clock to meet our important objective to work with the existing forms and the existing systems. We want to minimize the burden on both employers and hardworking taxpayers in getting this implemented in February. This is just the first step in a three-step process. Next, the IRS will be releasing a new withholding calculator that will be available on irs.gov by the end of February. This will help provide individuals with certainty so that they are neither over-withheld or under-withheld and can plan their financial decisions. We have reviewed this very carefully, and based upon last year's withholding tables, approximately 76% of taxpayers were withheld so that they had refunds at the end of the year. We expect, based upon the new tables, there will be no material change in this number. We will encourage taxpayers to use the calculator when it is released, and we'll launch a marketing effort to make sure people understand that. Finally, I'd like to say that the Treasury and IRS will work together to release a new W-4 for 2019. We expect to release that later in the year. We will be meeting with employers, payroll providers to determine how to best to design the form to reflect the new law. And the IRS will continue to focus on simplification and a user-friendly process. These new tables will help deliver the tax cuts as soon as possible to as many Americans as possible with as little disruption as possible. This will continue to focus and fuel the optimism and economic growth that is returning to this country. I'd also like to highlight the announcement this morning from Walmart. We want to thank them. They will be increasing their minimum wages, issuing bonuses, and expanding family benefits for over 1 million employees. Walmart is the latest company to make such an announcement, directly result of the Tax Cuts Act, and they join over 130 other companies across the nation who have already given such relief. We're now up to over 2 million workers that have seen either special bonuses or additional wages. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I have to start with you because you had the hat.
Okay, thanks. make me laugh. In regards to Walmart and the minimum wage, since they've already have the money and are increasing the minimum wage, does that mean that we can expect movement on the federal government's behalf to increase the federal minimum wage for everyone?
Well, I think the most important issue is for companies to increase their wages. And Walmart's number is already above the minimum wage. This is obviously an issue for the federal government. It's an issue for states. But I'd say the real focus, which is what the Tax Cuts Act has been all about, is putting more money in companies. We've said all along, we believe that 70% of this will be returned to workers.
Quick follow-up, do you believe that they should raise the minimum wage, that it should be a federal
Next question.
raise?
Go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, just for those who are watching, on February 1st, will these withholding tables go into effect, and that's when the American taxpayer will first see a change in the withholding of their paycheck?
Well, it'll definitely be in February. Some companies will have it set up for February 1st. Some companies may have the next pay cycle. But we are encouraging companies to do this as quickly as possible. We're ahead of schedule in the release of this, and we'd expect that in any event it's in February.
What is the point of the Trump administration going to a place that is regarded usually as a hangout for globalists?
Well, I don't think it's a hangout for globalists. I think the idea is the economic team is going to go over and talk about the America First economic strategy. We're thrilled that the president is coming, and I think what we know is that the economy that's good for the U.S. is good for the rest of the world.
You just talked about Walmart, and that's a big deal. What has been the efforts with Walmart, with this administration, for them to raise their wages?
Well, again, the whole purpose of the Tax Cuts Act was to put more money in companies so that they could compete competitively with international companies. I think you know we had one of the highest tax rates in the world. We taxed on worldwide income. We've changed that. I mean, this is really a revolutionary process. We thought it would be great for the economy, and we're thrilled with already the number of companies that we see reacting accordingly.
Talking with Walmart on this, how long have you been talking?
We've been talking with lots of companies for a long time, and we're thrilled with how people are responding. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You are using an outdated, or the system will use an outdated W-4 form for this year. You will encourage people to go on to a calculator on the IRS website to maybe try to figure things out. Taxes are messy to begin with. How is this not going to lead to, in one way or another, some sort of implementation mess?
Well, you know, I give an enormous amount of credit for the team at Treasury and the team at IRS who have literally been working around the clock through the holiday. As you mentioned, we had an existing form, we had existing technology. We had to figure out how to fit this in this format. The fact that we've been able to keep the same percentage of people that get refunds, we wanted to make sure that people weren't over withheld or under withheld. So we ran lots of models to run this. That's phase one. Phase two, as soon as the calculator comes out, the calculator will work with the new tax system, child tax credits, $10,000 deduction. So a taxpayer can see, do I have the right number of exemptions that are filed, or should I adjust that? And then, as I said, we're going to work on a super user-friendly form that fits the new tax system. We're going to try to do that. I want to make sure we get a lot of feedback as we design that and update this.
I guess when people hear a three-step implementation process of a massive tax system, in no way this was rushed to try to get this out there for paychecks in February?
Absolutely not. I mean, we update the withholding tables every year. You know, there's more work, but again, our objective is to get people money as quickly as they can. 90% of the people will see changes. Yes, in the back.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I just want to be clear. It sounds to me like you are saying that the administration's policies are partly responsible for the Walmart wage rise, but that the layoffs are nothing to do with you. Am I understanding that correctly, and is that not inconsistent?
What I'm saying is the administration's economic policies are a function of what we see: growth and investment. Different companies will do different things. Some companies will invest capital. Some companies will return money to workers. Lots of things are going on in the economy, and we appreciate what Walmart's doing. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Last year at Davos, Chinese leader Xi Jinping made a speech, and he talked about isolationism not necessarily being a good policy for most countries around the world, and sort of was viewed very much as China making an entreaty to the global economy, saying, hey, we're open for business at a time when other countries are turning inward. Is the president going to respond to that line of argument when he goes to Davos? What's he going to say when he's there?
Well, I think you've heard a lot of the president's messages. I expect that they'll be consistent. I expect the president will talk about trade, reciprocal, free, and fair trade. We've obviously been very clear with the Chinese on the issue that we have with the trade deficit, making sure that U.S. companies can compete fairly. And the president will talk a lot about his economic program and the impact on the global economy.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Staying with trade, can you give us an update on the negotiations over NAFTA? And how concerned is this administration over the fact that Canada has recently made a complaint to the WTO and that Mexico is concerned that this administration will, in short order, withdraw from NAFTA?
We gave the president an update this morning on trade. I think he's very pleased with where things are going. Ambassador Lighthizer is doing an amazing job renegotiating NAFTA, and we expect that will be renegotiated or we'll pull out.
Mr. Secretary? Yes, Mr. Secretary, I know you've had a lot going on with taxes, but since we have you here, could you give us an update on Treasury's progress on this list of Russian oligarchs that Congress had asked for? I believe we were expecting it sometime in January. Can you let us know where that's at?
We're working on it as we speak. It should be released in the near future, and it's something we're very focused on.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, if I heard you correctly, you're predicting that there won't be a great increase, decrease rather, in the number of American taxpayers who used to get a refund, who would, basically the same number will still get a refund that have been expecting to get a refund all along. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, what we're
Can you then address the Democrats' charge that you all are juicing this?
again, I think this is another ridiculous.